Director of Probation and Correctional Alternatives, and as the chairperson of the New York State Probation Commission, which meets at least twice per year. On behalf of Commissioner Rosanna Rosado and our Executive Deputy Commissioner, Joe Popkin, and our Director of Strategic Planning, Dean DeFrucio, I'd like to welcome you to today's meeting. Commissioner Rosanna Rosado and our Executive Deputy, Joseph Popkin, are in the city, I believe, with Governor Hochul. Today is the signing of the Clean Slate Bill law into law. So that's an exciting movement forward in advancing public safety in New York State. So Commissioner Rosado sends her regards, and unfortunately, she was unable to be here today. We have several members available who will introduce themselves, and first I will ask Commissioner Posey, if you would.
Rocco Posey, Commissioner of Probation for Westchester County.
Also here today, not members, but actually we appreciate them joining in person, is the President of the Council of Probation Administrators. Alan, would you introduce yourself?
Alan Frisbee, Director of Greene County Probation, and as Bob indicated, COPA President.
And we thank you for joining us. That's quite a responsibility, Alan. Alan's also the Greene County Probation Director, so he's got his hands full between two responsibilities. Also joining us telephonically, electronically, is Mary Ellen Still. Mary Ellen, good morning. Would you introduce yourself? Should be a host, Mary Ellen. We'll check it from here, Mary Ellen. See that if you were muted, we will unmute you. Yeah. All right. So we will go on. Also a member.
I'm sorry, Bob. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Good morning, Mary Ellen. How are you? Mary Ellen's the Director of the Dutchess County Probation Department. Good morning. Please introduce yourself. I know I said the department.
Thanks, Bob. Sorry for the technical difficulty there. I'm Mary Ellen Still. I'm the Director of Dutchess County Probation and Community Corrections.
Thank you, and nice to have you with us this morning, Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen also heads up the training committee, I believe, with the Council of Probation Administrators, and plays a key role on our statewide training committee, which Patty Clements oversees. So we're really pleased to have you this morning, Mary Ellen. And also, thank you. Also representing and a member of the commission is Joe Wargo from Jefferson County. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. And I wasn't sure if I'd make it because of snow, but that wasn't the case. It's unfortunately been due to COVID this week for me. So I'm at home with COVID. So, but I'm still here to join you. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Joe's the supervisor with the Jefferson County Probation Department. Joe, I heard that this morning, and we wish you a speedy recovery.
I'm definitely on the mend. Unfortunately, it's starting to go through my house.
It's still with us, I'm afraid.
Also,
yeah, well, we'll get well soon, and take good care of yourself and your family. Right. Also joining us this morning is representing the Chief Administrative Judge, Joseph Zayas. And joining us this morning is his Chief of Staff, Paul Lewis. Good morning, Mr. Lewis. How are you doing?
I'm going to be there personally, but there are no trains. City to Albany this week.
We can hear you, but it's very low. We can't hear you really low. You're on mute now. The mute sign came on before.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to look at the
better.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I would have been there in person. There are no trains running from New York City to Albany and this week. So thank you, everybody, for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, unable to join us today, and we're sorry that they were unable to join us, is Ana Bermudez. Ana Bermudez was recently appointed as a member of the Probation Commission. She's former commissioner of the New York City Department of Probation and frankly known nationally. leadership and probation. But I know she had a family matter to attend to. And also Dr. Jeffrey Butts, a researcher and well-respected professor from John Jay, is attending the National Criminal Justice Conference where he's a presenter today, or else Jeff Butts would have been here as well. Did I forget any members of the commission this time? Anyone member that I forgot to introduce? All right. At this time, I'd like to introduce our staff, beginning with Assistant Director.
Dan Connor.
Dan Connor, yes, excuse me, thank you. Joining me also, now I see, Dan Connor, the new president of the New York State Probation Officers Association. Thank you, Gary. Dan, good morning. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, as you just said, I am the newly elected president of the POA. I officially take over January 1st, but glad to be here today. I'm up at Jefferson County with Joe, but I lost my ride-along partner for the day due to COVID, so here I am.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and
Thank you for the invite.
congratulations on your election as president of the New York State Probation Officers Association.
Thank you.
You know, we've supported the Probation Officers Association annual conference through the years because it is such a high quality event. And really appreciate you taking the leadership. We know it's a job. Gladys Lawson did a wonderful job, so you got big shoes to fill, but we're sure you'll do great work with her.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. At this time, thank you, Gary. Why don't we introduce members of our great staff?
Good morning, Gary Goebel, DCJS Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives. I'm one of our assistant directors with my areas of responsibility, including criminal court probation, juvenile family court probation, and now ATI. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle Clark, I'm a CCR3 in the Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives. I manage the Vocation, Education, Employment, and Reentry Unit here at OCA.
That's a lot.
Morning, everybody. Frank Cangiano, manager of the Adult Probation Operations Unit here at DCJS Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives. Other things I oversee the Ignition Interlock device program, as well as the critical incident reviews that are conducted by our office.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. And we want to congratulate Frank Cangiano on his promotion to manager of the Adult Probation Operations Unit since we met last. So congratulations again.
Thank you, Bob.
Great job.
Kelly Palmetier, I'm the manager of the Interstate Compact Unit here at DCJS Office of Probation.
Kelly, I don't know when you were appointed. It was
Almost a year ago.
So Hal Kelly's been leading the Interstate Unit and is also involved with has been with the Interstate Compact for Juveniles as well. He's been a deputy compact administrator historically for that. So very, very busy office. Thank you. And over on the other side, Nicole.
Morning, everybody. Nicole Aldi. I am the manager of the Alternatives to Incarceration Unit here at DCJS OPCA. Among other things, we oversee some pretrial services with the funding, as well as defender-based advocacy programs, community service, task, and other specialized programs across the state.
Good morning, Patty Clemens. I'm the director of training here at OPCA. One of our primary tasks is running the Fundamentals of Probation Practice Academy. We also oversee the other 6 sites that run that academy. We're overseeing the basic course for peace officers and the overall training plan for the state.
Good morning, all. I'm Teresa Scanu Hansen. I manage our juvenile probation operations team here at OPCA.
Morning, everybody. I'm Matt Churton. I'm Assistant Director at OPCA. Areas of responsibility include state unit, employment, and reentry.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. So now we'll go down the agenda, and I'll just say this. We do have item 3. We're looking for feedback from the commission members. We have some guests here, too. The presidents of COPA and POA are our guests, but we'd like them to comment. But items 3 will be getting into some discussion, and as chair of the Probation Commission, I really need to hear feedback from the members, all of our members, on these 2 crucial elements. And then we have a number of updates for you. Our staff have been quite busy, and we'll provide those updates. First, we're going to review and ask for the approval. Hopefully, you've had a chance to review the minutes of the May 23rd, 2023 meeting. And I want to, just shout out to Molly Fowler, who's taken the minutes for today's meeting remotely and produced these minutes and did a great job in doing it. Do I hear a motion? I'll move. So moved by Commissioner Posey. Second?
Second.
Second, Mary Ellen Still, Director Still, Probation Commission member. All those in favor, please signal by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Having heard none, the motion carries, and the minutes of the May 23rd, 2023 meeting are fully approved. Next, we're looking at a subject that it's really changed the fabric of what we're doing. It's good. There's been a lot of positive moves. 2 years ago, New York State passed into law the requirement, enhanced requirements for the basic course for peace officers. It was effective January 1st, 2022. That meant that all peace officers were now required to complete the 162-hour peace officer course. For years, our fundamentals of probation practice and evidence-based training had fully satisfied that requirement. During the past couple of years, the Municipal Police Training Council added really 2 items to the requirements of the basic course. 40 hours in crisis intervention, actually 3 days in crisis intervention training, something that we've done in the past, but wasn't a requirement of our fundamentals. And then secondly, a full week of defensive tactics. Again, something that we had done, but not a full week. We got short notice of this. We were apprised of it in the fall of 2021, with the expectation that we'd be able to put this into effect January 2022. On May 8th of 2022, Patty Clements, our Director of Training, and I attended the Municipal Police Training Council and asked for more time. And the Municipal Police Training Council granted that to us at that time, January 1st, 2023. And the reason was, and still remains to this day, that probation has performed a service that is performed by counties in the great city of New York. So we have 57 county and the city of New York probation departments. And that's 58 employers that we had to communicate. And we had to ensure that each of those employers was on board and knew of these new requirements. And so we worked. Patty really led this effort, and working with the training academies, of which we have 6, worked very, very intensively to ensure that by January 1st, 2023, we were in a position to comply with the new law. So that's the history there. Probation directors during that time, we encourage probation directors to work with their HR or human resources or personnel officers to ensure that full requirements and expectations of the BCPO would be met, i.e. that candidates were given notice that this new training is required, and secondly, that it included a full week of defensive tactics. And so there's some element of physical agility associated with these positions. We did that successfully. We have retooled our fundamentals. And it's worked out pretty well. There's about 17 or 18 BCPO training units across the state. They're largely provided through the police training centers and zones, but there are some additional ones as well. And frankly, Patty and I spoke to those training directors during that period to ensure that they were ready, willing, and able to accept probation officers. But keep in mind that you can fully complete the basic course for peace officers. It's an excellent training course, and never really know anything about probation practice, because that is learned in this room and in the 6 academies throughout New York State. And it's called the fundamentals of probation practice. We pride ourselves in providing an evidence-based training. the fundamentals of probation practice. So that's a requirement. With that in mind, we're embarking on revamping Part 346 rule. See that later on the agenda. Part 346 is our staff development rule. And the key question that presents itself for today for discussion is right now, we have always proceeded in providing 6 months of time for a person to be trained, fully trained, the fundamentals after hiring. The basic course for peace officers and it's the public officers.
It's a separate reg. I'm not sure
Yeah.
what part it is, but it's a
Reg of New York State requires that a person may perform peace officer responsibilities. Keep in mind, including police officers, provided they're trained within a year. And that concerns me, and I spoke to Mike Ponce, our deputy here in charge of public safety. I said, I think there's liability there. I think that saying that a peace officer can perform their full responsibilities, provided they're trained within a year, doesn't really satisfy what we need. And we're looking at proposing change to that law. A person should be fully trained. A peace officer has some really important responsibilities: the ability to search, the powers to arrest, an officer, and also, when trained, the ability to carry a weapon and use that weapon under certain prescribed circumstances. Those are some pretty awesome responsibilities, and they concern human life. And we think people should be fully trained before they go into practice. And so this has been an area of great concern. Here at training and across our academies, Patty Clements has continued to tell the classes and the directors, all the directors out there, Alan's heard this, and so have all the directors, please be very careful about what you allow a peace officer to do and the responsibilities they perform until such time they are fully trained. 3 weeks ago, I had dinner with our latest class that was completing the fundamentals of probation practice. And Assistant Director Gary Goebel was there. Patty Clements, of course, is our Director of Training. And what we heard from our probation officers is 2 things. One, that some of them had been practicing for as long as 18 months, and now we're completing the fundamentals, and said this would have been so helpful if we had it at the beginning of our employment as a probation officer, number one. And number two, I now have a full caseload. And frankly, I am frustrated and nervous about sitting in class for 3 weeks and knowing that pile on my desk is growing. That's not the way we ought to be training probation officers in New York State. The way we ought to be training probation officers, and frankly, police officers, is that we ought to be hiring them and doing the hiring, timing that hiring, so it coincides with the commencement of training, even if that means delaying hiring a month or 2. And for probation directors across the state, this has been a great frustration because the budgets have been tight. When granted the ability to hire, it jumped on that. Said, let's get the people aboard and we'll train them as we go. But I'm saying here today to you that that's an area of concern. And it's been an area of liability. And so I want to open up for discussion among probation commissioners and also ask our guests, president of the POA and president of the COPA, to also be part of that conversation. A conversation about the challenges of how we train people in New York State. Monday, we have our work group. Patty heads that work group on 346. But I think it's invaluable to receive your feedback on this very subject. I'm going to ask Gary Goebel if he'd like to comment on this.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment for the Probation Commission members reference and our guests before they speak. When I was a supervisor at Albany County Probation, one of the other challenges that I ran into is, if there's a new employee, you're trying to evaluate them during a probationary period when they haven't been fully trained and, they're in and out of the office to complete the training. So I think that's another challenge of the system, the way it is now, and, the limited capacity that we have to, complete the training in that manner.
Thank you for that. It's an excellent point. So as employers, you've hastened to hire this probation officer because you finally got the approval and you were waiting to fill that line. And now you're doing it and you're trying to train that person, but the truth is they're gone for 6 weeks for basic course for peace officers. And then they're gone for 3 weeks if they're traveling to Albany. You really don't have the ability to evaluate them fully while they're performing peace officer because they're not performing the full responsibilities. Isn't it time that through regulation that we address this, that we bite the bullet in New York State and that we say, you know what? We're going to time our hirings and we're going to talk to our county executives and we're going to talk to our town boards as leaders because our probation directors are leaders and say, you know what? This is not the way we should be doing business. The way we should be doing business is we should carefully time the hiring of people and train them. And I know that there's advantages and disadvantages. So that's the subject. And I'm going to ask probation commissioners for their input on this. And Mary Ellen, I'm going to put you on the spot first because you are and have been the director of training for COPA through the years, and you've got a lot of experience and wisdom on this subject. Thoughts on the subject?
Thanks, Bob. And I've given a lot of thought to this as our training director within the department and also as being part of the staff development committee. And this is certainly something I think that needs to be addressed. And I think we have to also take into account that different sized departments may have different challenges. The very large departments may find it a little easy, that are doing their own training, may find it a little easier to, coordinate the training that takes place in the academies with the fundamentals. Smaller to medium departments, the timing, I believe, presents an issue. In order to get probation officers properly trained within the time frame that is required, because you could find yourself in a situation where someone's probationary period as a probation officer has expired, but they have not yet fulfilled the peace officer requirements. So that's another challenge. So I would agree with you that we need to address this and make it consistent. I know like police and other agencies do that training first. So they don't run into a situation where someone's on the, job 12, 18 months before they go into fundamentals. So I think coordinating the classes so that one follows the other as quickly as possible at the time of hiring, because you're correct in that when there's an opportunity to hire, oftentimes you need to take that opportunity when it's available, because it may not be available, say, in 6 months or whatever, depending on the budget circumstances of the individual counties. But I think it is going to continue and probably become even more problematic if we don't address this. And certainly the liability of for departments and counties not having probation officers properly trained it's enormous. And also you can't use your probation officers to the full extent without that training. So it's kind of a catch-22. So I think that addressing it and from a variety of angles is would be appropriate, certainly through staff development or any legislation. I think its time has come.
Well, thank you, Mary Ellen. And I'm just thinking that, one of the things we're working on at OPCA is putting in place an application process for the training academies. And the reason is this would give us formal notice of when the academies, the 6 academies, are operating. That'll put our director of training in a better position to work with those training directors and try to figure out a schedule where maybe it provides more coverage throughout the year. Right now, the academies have kind of operated independently. They certainly use our curriculum, our evidence-based curriculum, and they advise Patty sends out the materials. But we don't have much coordination. It's when a department needs to train. And perhaps through this application process, similar to what's done with the peace officers and the basic course, where they submit the application and the curriculum and notification of trained professionals and able to do the training, we would be in a better position to work with the training academies to ensure coverage. The other thing is we recognize that we need to enhance our staffing in our own training unit. We're down staffing in our training unit. I think all employers across the state know it's difficult hiring people with the right experience, but we need to enhance our training unit. Right now, we do 2 fundamentals classes per year. Maybe we need to do 3 or 4 fundamentals classes per year with the appropriate staffing. So there's always a greater opportunity for departments to send their people to Albany. I know that's costly. So I think through a combination of increasing our training capacity here and coordinating local academies, that might be helpful. Other comments?
I think that,
Yeah,
I think it would, I'm sorry, go a long way to resolving the issue. Adding classes, because that would address also the coordination.
Yes. Okay.
So Bob, if I can just make a quick comment, one of the things, and I know we're going to talk about Part 346 later in the agenda, but it's appropriate to this conversation. One of the things that we're contemplating in that rule revision is basically as the establishment of some guidelines and standards, right? Not only to operate an academy, but to actually open an academy. So, in addition to trying to put staff within this unit, which is fantastic, we also need to think about the ability to open up more academy sites, right? And so having some standards, the application process will there's so many different pieces to this puzzle that kind of all need to culminate to resolve the problem. And obviously we're just identifying a few. So I just wanted to let folks know that that's kind of part of the landscape of that rule revision discussion.
Thank you. Other members, comments?
Well, there's a couple issues here. First of all, I've for many years, I've had the opportunity to have civil service allow me to have a 2-year probationary period before I make somebody permanent. Because I said many, many years ago that you need more than 1 year to evaluate whether a probation officer, really should be given permanency. Especially if you're going to lose them for an extended period of time during that 1 year, you just don't have enough time to evaluate. So, we have a 2-year probationary period. I think that's worked out real well. So that's one of the things I think we should be moving towards. I think we need, I don't know whether we'll ever get to the point where we just hire during certain times of the year so that we can get probation officers right into the academy. But I think it would be beneficial for us to identify maybe the things that probation officers can do, when we hire them prior to them going into the academy. There are some valuable services that they can perform for the department, and that's what we do in Westchester. We won't, if we hire, they haven't gone through the academy, they will not do field work, they will not do certain activities that may jeopardize the department or cause some liability issues for us because they haven't been trained. But there are some valuable functions, that they can fill, prior to them getting into the academy. So, I think we really need to study it. I think it's, there's no easy answer to this, to this thing. And it would really be great if we could be like corrections and be like police where we just hire, a lot of people, and then we can have an academy. It just doesn't work that way for probation. I mean,
Given the size of the
yeah,
department.
and I think the important thing is, even in Westchester, a large department, when they give me the green light to hire somebody, I'm doing it right away before they change their minds. If something, something budgetarily, I think as Mary Ellen has said, we're okay today, and then 3 months from now, something happens or whatever, and then I'm not getting the green light any longer. So, I'd rather work hard to find something, positive that a probation officer can do before I get them into the academy, and not hiring them, so that's.
So that's very valuable, and it's another aspect of our 346, where I think could lend itself to regulatory control, where we prescribe the activities that probation officers can perform. It won't be an exhaustive list because it's always difficult to, define every instance. But I think we should be giving guidance in regulation on that. So that's another valuable aspect of it. And, I think in Westchester, you have the latitude with the 2-year where you can say, okay, we're going to hire them because we're not going to make that decision. But the truth is that's not uniform, of course, throughout the state. And these other states are pressed. So going back to the group we had dinner with, there's a person 18 months who's been hired. That person's permanent, yet they were never fully trained and never really able to perform full responsibility. So it runs the gamut. Right.
Exactly.
That's the challenge, I think, out there that we run.
Well, the way it works for us right now, I'm hiring right now some probation officers, and we won't have an academy until May. I think Daniela said the next academy that we're having. So we'll figure out what they can do. But the 2-year probationary period, once they go through the academy and they graduate sometime in September, let's say, they finish everything, I still have a year to evaluate them. I mean, I can evaluate them prior to the academy. I can see their performance in the academy, and then I've got a year, at least to see how they perform in the field and in their units. So that's where I think the 2-year probationary period has been invaluable for Westchester, because they used to take a test, Bob, years ago. I mean, we hired as a trainee, you took a test for a PO1, and then you took a test to become a PO2 a year later.
That's right.
We should really be, granting permanency to our probation officers, not based off a civil service exam, but their performance. How do they perform, in the office? How do they perform in the field? And we also do quarterly evaluations on all of new employees for that 2-year period.
That's great.
So that we're evaluating their progress or lack of progress. We're not seeing progress there, and we're giving some remedial, instruction on what we need to have done to make that probation officer get to be permanent, and if they can't reach it, then we know very early on.
Do you have any sense of whether that 2-year probationary period has impacted your recruitment?
No, not at all. Not at all. No. I have people chomping at the bit too.
That was going to be my question in terms of, because some of the counties, the larger counties, I think, have more, they're in a better position. You got more people, centers, but some of the smaller counties, I wonder if that might put a damper on the ability to hire. But again, you have a great system in Westchester, and certainly the idea of promotion based and permanency based on performance is a great perspective. Of course, we'd have to work with the Civil Service Department to make that a statewide law, and it would be a good law, I think. Other comments from commission members? I need to hear your thoughts. Commission member Joe Warga, if you're feeling up to it, thoughts on the subject, former past president of the pre-POA.
I think Mary Ellen hit a good point that the different size counties bring different issues and concerns. A county of my size, we're relatively small. When we have a vacancy, it's a huge void that needs to be filled. And so then we get the pressure of what do we do with that caseload and who's going to cover what, and until that that person can get hired. And then we tend to want to jump on that as quickly as possible. And here's your next caseload, which is it's a blessing and a curse, I suppose, as we've come to realize. Filling vacancies before they occur is almost impossible. And at least in our county, we can't even put in a vacancy review request until the person's gone. So trying to plan ahead for that, if that's civil service law, I'm not sure. If that's a county thing, I'm not involved with the hiring and firing part per se, so I don't know that procedure piece. But it seems like if sometimes people leave out of the blue, but sometimes we know months ahead of time that somebody's planning for their retirement. And if we have that knowledge, why can't we start planning ahead for replacing of that position somehow? And I don't know how to go about that, but there's got to be a way to be able to do that.
It's a good point, Joe. I think part of that is because the county's got to continue paying that salary for a number of weeks or months until, the obligation is required, and they can't afford to then pay a second person. So I think finances enters into that subject, but I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. I mean, I understand that, but that dovetails into my next point, and you alluded to earlier, is the training and timing it with the training. It's going to require more funding. For us in Jefferson County, we have to send people to Albany, or in this case, our next one's going to Broome County for the peace officer academy piece. That's 2 to 3 hours away, plus hotels. And bigger counties, Albany, Monroe, Erie, they might have academies right in there, and so they don't have the expense of that. So increasing funding is going to be an issue regardless of how we do this. And again, I don't know how you get that, but I don't know. I just feel like there's got to be a way to be able to not necessarily, well, I guess fill a position or plan to fill the vacancy before it happens when we know it's going to happen, especially when somebody's planning their retirement. They're excited about retirement and public about it months in advance. And to time that with an academy is going to be tricky, of course, but I just think for smaller counties, it's a little more challenging because it leaves a bigger pit or a bigger void to fill. Or a larger county, they have 100 or 200 people in their department, one person missing or one or two retiring, it's absorbed a little easier. I could be wrong, but that's my thought and my perspective on that.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that.
Another issue with trying to fill a position prior to somebody retiring is not only the cost of having two people, trying to fill, two people on the same line. It's also, I know our budget director always says that they get frightened that the person may change their mind and not want to retire. You've hired somebody to replace them. We used to have a rule. We used to have, you remember Tony D'Angelo, who was an assistant commissioner in Westchester. We have the D'Angelo rule. He pulled his papers twice. He was going to retire. So, until you're gone, a lot of times, the budget directors and finance people don't want to fill lines until people are actually out of them, So.
Right. Good point. Good point.
On the other hand, we also have those that decide they get halfway through the academy and don't like it or don't want to do it and drop out too.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So those are the
I think
challenges.
that's very true, what you were, just saying in terms, but there's also another factor to that. Often people have payouts. So they're not only occupying a line, but the county has to pay them out for time. And so they've got to account for that as well. And they can't have two people in that same line. But it wouldn't, I don't think, prohibit to start the planning process. But I know in our county, they won't release the list until that line is clear.
Maybe something could be worked out, Bob, where if you know someone's retiring, it takes a long time to hire somebody. I mean, the paperwork is extensive. So maybe we can work out something where we have, we call for the list, we do the hiring, we get all the background investigations done, we do whatever needs to be done to get the person to the point where the day that the individual retires, that person can probably start maybe that day or even maybe shortly thereafter, so that you're not putting the papers in and requesting, to fill the line the day that the person leaves. So you can pick up a couple months, because it really does take a long time to get the paperwork done.
And that could go into the commentary section for part 346 when we hear helpful insight.
Mhm.
That.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And, it seems like common sense, but the truth is none of us do it. We wait until the person retires and then we start, and they say to it, don't do the posting. We have the same here, don't send the request to fill until the line is available. And then months go by and we're in this position.
Is it Mark Twain that said common sense is not so common?
Right, exactly. Exactly. Other comments from commission members, and Mr. Lewis, I know you're representing the chief administrative judge, and this isn't your normal bailiwick, because you're pretty busy operating the vast Office of Court Administration, but a real challenge there. But maybe if you have any comments, certainly I'm open to it.
My only comment is that just generally becoming more and more difficult for us to hire people. It started some of our biggest court officer classes, and we lost a number of people during the course of the class, but we don't have the same problem with vacancies. We just continue to try to add numbers as when we can, when the budget allows.
Yeah, and you must face this with your security officers. That would probably be the analogy, because you have quite a security force in the courts and the peace officers, and I'm sure that you face the same challenges there. Is the Office of Court Administration seeing a challenge with recruiting court officers?
Yes, we've been expanding, we've been pushing out into county fairs and a lot of outreach. And we've been doing that for a couple of years now. We just had our biggest graduating class of court officers, maybe the biggest class ever just recently. But it's increasingly difficult to and we found we just need to try hard. We have to strategize on where we need to go to present the opportunity to become a court officer, and how to publicize it the best way. And we have had some success, like I said, going to local fairs and different types of meetings and committees and things like that. We recruiting in schools, but it's difficult. We just have to. We find that we're working harder to get the same number of people to come in.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me ask both the presidents of POA and COPA as well, and Alan, I'm going to ask you first, President, representing the Council of Probation Administrators, thoughts on this.
There have been some very good points made today regarding this whole situation in various spheres. In my county, I haven't had to hire a PO in almost 7 years. So it's been different. And so I'm not facing some of the same things, but I do have some changes on the horizon, with retirements and whatever. And you're into that same thing. I don't have an active list. So there's a test coming up. We did get changes made to the job announcement to reference that they're probably going to have to travel for extended periods of time to go to trainings, and there also will be a physical component to the trainings. I figured I wanted to have that right in there, right up front, not surprise somebody when they come in afterward. So I was able to work with my civil service office to get those changes made for that. I think back when I started in this, long before I was a literal graybeard, I got hired in October. The fundamentals class was 2 weeks. It was 1 week in November, 1 week in December, in which part of that was delayed by a snowstorm. I couldn't get there. And then my peace officer wasn't for another year. And so you don't have the fully qualified persons to be able to do these things. And you're throwing people in, you get handed a stack of stuff, you know nothing, basically. But here, this is your responsibility. You have to make do with this. And then you kind of learn on the fly in your own way, and then you get the official way of learning this, that, and some of the background materials and so on and so forth. So I've long thought that it should be set up more along the lines of state police, corrections, military. You come on the job, you go to your boot camp, so to speak, and then you're available. While also recognizing, what has been pointed out, in a small department, when you have somebody leave, I have 10 professional persons, including myself. So that's, one person leaves, that's a 10% hit on professional staffing. So it is a bigger impact on a smaller department than, I mean, Rocky, you probably hire as many people in the course of a week as we have on our whole staff. So there are some realities to all of that. You know, there are different ways of doing it. I'm wondering, when I do come around to being able to hire somebody, where they're going to go for the peace officer part. I mean, we're in an adjacent county, having them drive back and forth to Albany every day for the fundamentals part, that's not such a big deal. And we can work that into compensatory time, something like that, because they have the travel, you know, before and after. But if the peace officer classes aren't any closer to meeting Poughkeepsie, that's even further compensation to have to factor in. When we had our area meeting a month or so ago, whenever it was, Mary Ellen, if you remember, Tim Davidian from Orange County said it cost them like $36,000 or something to have people go through various trainings because they were paying overtime and so on and so forth. And I think they were going to Westchester. So
I believe so. Yeah. I believe it was Westchester.
And it was some exorbitant fee like that, right, Mary Ellen? Like $36,000 he was talking about?
Yes, he was describing the cost to us and, you know, the concern around that. And I think it speaks again to the different circumstances that different sized departments have and the different challenges they have.
Absolutely, and what I'm hearing is, you know, the need for more financial support so we can train probation officers, because you know, part of the issue is really the cost. It's having them available, but it's the cost. So I noted that because Joe Popkin had asked me to put together a memo on the need for additional resources, and I'm going to add this in terms of the training, because if departments had resources for training, it would make it a lot less painful. But you know, Alan, I think you early in your comments, you said, you know, for a long, you're pretty seasoned in your career, and you said, I always thought it should be more like military and corrections, and you know, you get the professional training up front. I guess I want to say this to the members, and that is that we're leaders. We have it in our power to change the course of law. We have it in our power to change the course of regulation. And sometimes change is painful. No change comes with 100% benefit. There are always, you know, pluses and minuses. But it's important to, you know, to seize the opportunity and to lead. I just think that going forward, you know, one of the things I think that was a major change was all probation officers going through the basic course for peace officers. That was a hardship for departments, and we talked about that 2 years ago. But we also spoke, and I remember Mary Ellen saying at the time, yeah, but this is a good thing. This is a good thing because it's telling the system that probation officers and recognizing, we always knew we were peace officers, but now their training is such that, you know, we're on a par with everyone. And the truth is we exceeded because we also go through the fundamentals training. Probation officers are among the most educated and experienced individuals in the criminal justice system. You look at their educational credentials, they're required to have a 4-year degree and at least 2 years experience before you can become a probation officer in a related science. Many probation officers have their master's degrees and some even their doctorate degrees. So they're among the most experienced. We always knew that. We've known that for years. The rest of the system did not know that. Now they recognize through the BCPO that in fact, you know, we are their peers. And so if we're going to do that, it's time that we also, you know, demonstrate the leadership to really professionalize how we hire. If it requires more funding, we'll seek and get that funding to make sure the training is available at ready, you know, regular segments. But it shouldn't detract from doing what is the right thing, right? Dan, I want to call on you for comment, President of the POA.
My thoughts kind of go along with kind of what's been passed around the table here is it seems like a lot of these changes can really kind of hamstring the small and medium-sized departments more than anybody else, just because they don't have the resources right there necessarily available. Um, it's been a huge change that's been thrown at everybody's department, and I think it just boils down to if we could figure out a way, it had gotten mentioned, coordinating the basic probation officers academy with the BPO, getting those lined up so that departments could have a plan. It's my biggest fear with this is too many changes, and you might start seeing some of these small and medium sized counties, their legislators saying, you know what, we're just not going to bring on any new positions. The financial requirements and the hoops that we have to jump through, it's just not going to be enough to justify a new spot, and then everybody ends up suffering in the end. So I really do feel like we need to figure something out. I wish I knew the answer.
So I appreciate that, Dan. I think you're right. I think that the financial is important. What I'm hearing is on resources to counties to get their people trained, because there's a cost. We don't do training in our own community in large part. A lot of smaller jurisdictions have to travel, extensive travel, and Tim Davidian, Director of Orange County's example is a good one for his department and what he has to do, the hardship, because he's stuck right there in the middle in Orange County. And he's kind of a larger department, so he's got a lot of people to train. And so it's definitely a cost to Tim. And many like his, but I use him as an example. So the financial and then the regularity of training. And I think we can do something there, increasing our training staff, increasing the availability of training but that's in Albany. And so we need to really do the coordination with localities. And that's why we're working on this application in a uniform process in establishing criteria, really a structure, first time ever, a structure for the local training academies. What is required to run an academy? Ensure that we have fidelity. Because we have an excellent training curriculum. You look at our fundamentals of probation practice, and it is second to none. It is a great training, skill-based, adult-based training in how to engage clients and make a difference in the lives of New Yorkers. So something we're really proud of. Other comments before we go on? Any other final comments?
I have a quick comment. Another thing that came to mind, and Patty can comment on this further. I think the timing of the training, and I think thankfully this example has not been that common. But we have a year to complete peace officer. There have been people who have been unsuccessful at defensive tactics as part of that peace officer, when it could take them a year to do that. And the way the regulation is written, I believe they have to complete the entire basic course for peace officers as one course. So they might be required to take BCPO in its entirety over again for that lack of completion of DT.
It's an excellent point. We did some research. Patty, I asked Patty to reach out to the training academies. And while it is a point, it wasn't as great as we thought. So there are cases of that. I think it's a question of nuance and first impression too, because this requirement now has become, it's only in place a year. And that's why I think the notification, what Alan pointed to, he worked with his personnel director in making clear that the defensive tactics requirement is real. Not everyone, and people should know that up front, because certain candidates may say, you know what, I don't really want to be tested in that way, to have to meet a defensive tactics standard. I didn't think that was part of the probation job. And those candidates should have the information up front and the wherewithal to say, I'm going to decline that. There will be people who want to do it and fail, and I think the number is small, but they'll have to retake it. And, when we were doing our research, Patty and I reached out to the New York City Training Academy, Demetrius down there, and he said to me, the defensive tactics is not an agility test like the fire professional, where you're putting a tank and putting up 24s. It is physical, but most people can complete the defensive tactics. So a combination of notice beforehand and self-selecting, people self-selecting about what they can achieve, I think is important. Because let's face it, there are physical requirements to being a probation officer. And just this week, we had a probation officer who was injured and that they were severely bitten by a dog while out doing a home visit. So, these are realities, and we've had that circumstance in the past. There have been altercations, taking people into custody. You're in their home. You're not, and maybe you're a single probation officer on that home visit too. So there are demands, and we need to ensure that people are properly trained, right?
If I can just make a quick summary remark, because I know we have to move on. So I think, and thank you all, first of all, for all of the feedback on that. I think we can safely conclude that everybody's in agreement that in our perfect world, we would be able to train folks before we send them out into the field. And there's a variety of challenges, right? So we've mentioned a number of these: increasing the funding to probation, increasing access to those academies, and some of those things we're trying to address through the rule revision and the application process, and standardizing how an academy gets established in the first place, increasing staff here within our own office, the change in hiring practices, the pre-screening notion of letting folks know that this is kind of the reality of the job, and this is the reality of the training, and so changing some of those practices to include perhaps the civil service change with the increase in probationary period. But also importantly, there is a group out there, and I do see your hand, Joe. There is a group out there that we didn't mention, and that's the NIPAD. That's the New York Probation Academy Directors, the group that came together to be able to meet the challenge of the BCPO specifically. And we have worked very hard to be able to provide the opportunity for as many counties to access the BCPO in the sites where probation officers are training it. We've developed materials specifically for probation, and I think continuing to bolster the NIPAD group and establishing additional sites for the departments to access is also critical. Joe had his hand raised. I don't know if he had a comment on this.
Joe?
Just had one other comment that came to mind too when we're talking about costs and expenses, that we also just ran into this. Our new officer that's going to the academy, the BCPO Academy, now has to buy a uniform of sort. It's basic in terms of like a polo shirt or golf shirt and ODUs, BDU pants, tactical pant of some sort. But we have dress code, but we don't have uniform allotments or anything like that. So we had to now come up with the quote unquote uniform expense to send this person to an academy. So that's an additional piece, although it's not a huge expense, it's still another expense to go along with everything else to keep in mind.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that comment. A good discussion. I think we gleaned a lot of information from that. The 346 work group, staff development, will be meeting on Monday. I expect by early in the first quarter of 2024, we should have a product to get out to directors, informal review by directors of the 346 rule. And we'll proceed. Regulation, rulemaking is a very lengthy process, as we know. Second subject, and Chief of Staff Lewis, this will concern OCA certainly, and that is the subject of interim probation supervision and probation sentences. It's a subject that Matt Charton and I discussed with Chief Administrative Judge Zayas about a month ago when we met with Chief Zayas and Chief St. George and both counsel there as well. So it was a brief conversation because it was really a meet and greet that, I turned into a little bit of a discussion on interim, a concern. And let me lay out for the members today some of the concerns we've seen with interim. Interim's been existing for a number of years. It's kind of its own entity. When I got here, I worked with counsel to increase the regulations, and we actually changed the CPL to allow probation departments to treat interim cases much like supervision cases insofar as They could execute warrants on individuals. They could include orders and conditions for search conditions. They could file violations, etc. So we tried to bring parity to this area. The numbers have not been great. They've traditionally been between 3,500 and 4,000, 5,000. I think interim got its latest, and I say latest, but it's been a number of years, increase in numbers through Article 216, judicial diversion. When New York was reforming its drug laws, judicial diversion came into being and was very successful. We were trying to provide an alternative to state prison. Our state prison population in New York State was 72,500. We had 57 correctional facilities operating at the time. Today, we have fewer than 30,000 people incarcerated, dramatically reduced from 25,000 to just 2,000 individuals convicted of drug crime. So we made tremendous progress. I should add that burden has been placed on probation largely in terms of managing these people. But judicial diversion, and with that came judicial oversight through drug treatment courts. And I want to just harken back to the days of Judge Kay and her wonderful leadership as chief judge in establishing a system of drug treatment courts throughout New York State. CA's done some really fantastic work, not only with originally drug treatment courts, but then mental health courts, integrated domestic violence courts, veterans courts. So we have a rich system of alternative courts. And the interim system has worked pretty well. But what I discussed with Judge Zayas is what we're seeing is that individuals convicted of very violent crimes are being placed on interim. Young individuals, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, convicted of armed robberies, convicted of criminal possession of a weapon too, and not once, but twice, and being placed on interim. And unfortunately, in many of these cases, a pre-sentence investigation is not being ordered. So the person presents themselves at the door of probation saying, I just got convicted, I'm being placed on interim, I have not been sentenced, and my period of supervision is a year. As we know, interim can be up to 24 months when in fact the person is engaged in a certified drug treatment program. We let a change in the law that allowed that period of interim, I should add to the credit. So a person's credit and incentivize successful interim supervision. So it comes off the top on the subsequent implementation or sentencing for probation supervision, right? That was a good thing. But what I said to Judge Zayas, I'm reading critical incidents, most of them from New York City, where interim's being used, people placed on interim supervision. And he said, I have a concern. The judge said to me, do you have a concern with interim? I said, no, but I've got a concern with the lack of PSI. So judges are allowed to order pre-sentence investigations anytime and pre-plea investigations. And Mr. Lewis, what we would ask is the Office of Court Administration proffer a rule statewide where when a person is placed on interim, in fact, are presented particularly for violent crimes, that, the imposition of the interim supervision is delayed until such time the probation department has the opportunity to conduct an investigation of that individual and advise the court accordingly. The courts throughout the state rely so heavily on probation departments, as we know. Our probation departments work hand in hand with the courts, criminal courts and family courts. And judges regard that instrument, the pre-sentence investigation, so highly because there's no other document like it. That's what makes probation unique. It brings together the totality of the legal history, socioeconomic circumstances, even school circumstances and history, family background, and puts that all into a document with a strong evaluative analysis that informs the court of an objective professional, a probation officer's assessment of that individual. They do that 30,000 times a year in New York State. So it's a monumental task, and probation officers are prolific writers and great investigators, and that's one of the trainings. I've heard Commissioner Posey, a member of our commission, say in the past, if you're not conducting an investigation, person is placed on interim, you got to do an investigation anyway, because you don't know anything about them. And how can we supervise? The other thing is, without the benefit of a PSI, we don't really have the ability to influence orders and conditions. Part of that investigation is also sending to the court suggested orders and conditions. And with a person convicted of possession of an illegal handgun, a search condition is essential. The condition for a perhaps the accompaniment of electronic monitoring or a curfew. These are things that help probation officers and tools in managing an individual. So we'd like to work closely with Office of Court Administration on this. But, you know, suffice it to say that these are some of the problems we're facing with interim. You know, I personally, and I've said historically during my administration here, I don't like interim. I think it's a probation sentence to a probation sentence. I think it had utility with respect to drug law reform. I do, and the post judicial oversight under Judicial Diversion Article 216. But now I'm seeing that it's getting spread out, and I'm just wondering if in some of those cases, if in fact a sentence of community supervision is going to be imposed, that it be done through the traditional process of a detailed investigation that informs the court with a placement of supervision with conditions that we can report back. And I'll end on this note. I say probation directors all the time, when I see failures to report, and I say to them, you know, you're taking it upon yourself thinking that this case is your legal responsibility. Well, it's your responsibility to follow the direction of the court and ensure that the individual complies with the orders and condition. But keep in mind that this person is in the legal jurisdiction of the sentencing court, and non-compliance should be brought back to the attention of the judge. And you don't have to wait until you get to a violation. Advise that judge through a uniform court report that we're not seeing compliance. And that's where the individual can be brought back before the court. And we use what I call the power of the black rope. That is, the judge reminds the individual that, you know, he sentenced them to supervision, but there are other punishments out there available. And I think people listen to judges in courts. I think judges are very powerful in their influence over individuals. So we have this issue of interim, and we've seen this. And I want to have a conversation today with the commission members, but Mr. Lewis, I wanted to set a precedent, you know, set a foundation for our conversation. Certainly, we'll give you an opportunity to speak at some time, but let's hear from commission members, probation, and then certainly we'll talk about it more. And this is all preceded by our continuing relationship and our conversation with the leadership of Office of Court Administration. Commissioner Posey, can I call upon you to talk about interim and some of the concerns you see?
Well, I think you did a great job in highlighting a lot of the concerns I all have about interim and how it's being used. I haven't seen it that much in Westchester, you know, being used on, you know, felony, you know, assault cases or, you know, weapons cases and things like that. I'm sure we got a couple, but it's not running rampant. So I think the court in Westchester is using, you know, the interim, you know, in a wise way. You know, we just had a surge of interim cases come through a special program that the DA was doing on a tremendous backlog that they had, which resulted from COVID on DWI cases. You know, so, but the good news was that the DA sat down with us and we told them what we would need to have you know, I couldn't tell her, no, we don't want these cases, you know, but we did have the opportunity to tell the DA that, all right, if we're going to do this program and you want probation to do this, then this is what we need. Okay, we need investigation, we need orders and conditions, you know, these are the orders and conditions we would like to have on the cases. So we kind of, you know, triaged it and came up with a pretty good program, you know, and it's been pretty successful.
Excellent.
You know, so it's worked out well. But you're right, Bob. I mean, interim probation. You know, I've always said, if you're going to put someone on an interim probation, just put them on probation. You know, if they're not doing well, we can always take them back into court, you know, on a violation and address the delinquencies in the case, you know. So, but it hasn't really caused a lot of problems in Westchester.
And we're seeing a lot in the city, particularly with gun crimes, and it concerns us. It concerns us.
Totally inappropriate.
Yeah, inappropriate on a gun crime, absolutely.
There was another issue that we want to talk about with interim, is that sentence not occurring within the statutorily
Right.
specified time
Yeah.
frame. So we just want to introduce that.
Another issue that thank you for raising that. Mary Ellen Still, Commission Member Mary Ellen Still, Director of Dutchess County, thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, I think similar to what Rocco was just saying, we are not seeing interim on gun cases, and we see a fair amount of interim, but not a tremendous number and not a substantial increase. The courts seem to use it judiciously, and in terms of people who are sentenced to interim, many, if not most, are successful. So it certainly can be beneficial if it's used in a way that we're not putting people who really shouldn't be on interim. But I do understand, you know, what you're saying, and there can be a wide variety of how interim cases are used, and certainly district attorney, defense attorneys weigh in on the selection of the cases and recommendations to the court. So I would think there is a wide variety of dispositions of interim throughout the state.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Joe Wargo, thoughts? I know you're a smaller county up there in Jefferson, but you may be seeing some of it.
Yeah, a lot of our judges have been using it more and more and more, and a lot of the times they're just sending them over without any information. They just show up at our door. We sometimes don't even know it. So we have probation officers that go to court every day to, you know, particularly our county and city court, who are the primary users of that option, and they kind of track that. So they send an email out to the department ahead of time, so that we know it's coming, and so when they show up, we're ready for it, or at least a little better prepared for it. But still, we don't have a lot of information on them coming up. They show up. There's no validated assessment that shows anything. So, and I know it's not technically a formal probation, but it's still probation, and I agree with what's been said. It's a term of probation to sentence them to probation. If it's a time to get to know them, well, that's what the PSI is really for. Really, that gives us the information. Why don't we just rely on that and sentence them to probation? That's my thoughts on that, I suppose.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. Alan, President of COPA.
We have had a significant increase in interim cases over the last few years. And a lot of times what it's used that for is they'll take a felony plea, and if they're successful at an interim, then it'll be reduced to a misdemeanor conviction. We might get probation. Where we've had some problems, though, is sometimes we've had violations filed on interim, and they go ahead and put them on probation.
Yes.
So it's like, well, you're not successful on interim. Aren't you demonstrating then what the waste of time would seem to be to go ahead and impose a probation sentence? The other part that I can tell you, being the caseload person, primary caseload explorer person, is it's a logistical nightmare to switch the case from an interim case to a standard supervision case. Once you close it out this way, then you have to go into the IPER system to reopen it there. Then you make 10,000 changes in caseload, change the conviction, change the sentence, change assignment date, change the max date, change all of these different things to get everything to sync up. And then you have to reinstitute the conditions because they're all closed out once you close the case as interim going back to court. And then you got to sit there and open all those back up. And then we've also found that the PRCR triggers necessarily may not work. So the PO will sit there and say, wait, how come I haven't done a report on this, the PRCR on this person in a year and a half? It's not showing up on my activities due. And Audemars says, well, we've got to go back to the last PRCR and resave it. And just to get it to start that trigger. And the same thing with the risk level classification. That closes out, it shows up as blank. You have to go back to the last assessment, make a minute change in there, like wiping out the -11 on a compass score, save it, go back and put the -11 back in to repopulate. It's a tremendous headache.
So Alan, I hear a statement of work coming up. Alan's been our technical person for COPA, and he's done an extraordinary job, I should add. And is most noted for the work on the criminal history record information, CHRI, criminal history record information, to CE, Caseload Explorer integration, which we implemented earlier this year. Many of you have heard me say that. But Mr. Lewis, what this means for probation officers is that probation officers writing pre-sentence reports, of course, there's a legal history section for a pre-sentence investigation. And a person with an extensive rap sheet or department would have to retype that, put it into the legal history. And now that's all automated. A department can put in the individual's name and their NICID number, and it'll actually go up to DCGS and grab the legal history and insert it, arrests, arraignment, and dispositions into the legal history section of the DSI. Great feature on a person with an extended rap sheet. And Alan was a representative of that work group. And so we've done some automation to help probation departments. Directors out there, there are a few of them out there. If you're not using the standardized PSI template, now would be a good time to start because the PSI goes into the repository. It's available for judges throughout New York State to seek and obtain a copy of that PSI. And this is particularly important in the upstate jurisdictions where the courts meet infrequently. They meet and I was a prosecutor in some of those courts every second Tuesday. And maybe the judge needs a pre-sentence investigation and the probation department's 30 miles away. And if the department's using the template and it goes into the repository, the judge or the court clerk can go in and grab that PSI for sentencing that evening. So there are many, many benefits, including accessing the CHRE to CE integration. There's a few directors out there. Please pay attention to that. 2024, we want statewide similarity. Isn't that right, Gary?
That is right.
That is right. Gary worked on that.
We're going to talk about the PSI repository in the next item.
Yes. So back to interim. Technology is an issue. Practice is an issue. And also, I think it cheats probation's opportunity to inform the court. The court isn't fully apprised of who this person is. What they see is the person before them. So the interim is a concern, particularly on violent crimes. Dan, any comment from the Probation Officers Association on this? Maybe you heard some chatter at the conference, et cetera.
Yeah, and the side that I kind of bring to this is I actually am currently supervising some of these cases. I have right now on my caseload, I have 3 interim cases that I'm currently supervising. All of 3 are currently under violation right now as we speak. None of them are on for drug charges. They're all on for weapons possession, contempt, and weapons possession. So it's got the sense that it's kind of being used in some jurisdictions as just a kind of an easier way to get a plea deal. And I can tell you the cases I'm looking at that I'm getting at the greatest risk level are cases that it was used as a plea deal to get them out of a mandated prison sentence. They are put on, almost all of mine are put on as a felony interim with the option of being dropped to a misdemeanor later. So it does become an issue of safety when you are looking at these cases, especially. We are lucky in our department, we do get a pre-sentence report on these cases fairly soon after they begin. But I couldn't imagine the cases that I have, just the three that I have currently right now that are interim, not having a report before I'd gotten these people.
Those are excellent points, Dan. I think you hit it right on the head there. The absolute necessity of doing the investigation, and then what you're seeing as a plea deal, a negotiating tool. And unfortunately, I don't want to negotiate public safety, community safety, victim safety. And so I'm concerned about gun cases. Again, we're seeing an increase statewide, the use of interim in these felony cases. And so I think it's something that certainly requires our attention. And I read about 120 critical incidents here. You do the math, that's almost 3 a week that I'm reading. And we close out about half of those critical incidents because, in fact, practice is very, very good. There are some points where we assign those to our very busy staff who do an excellent job of analyzing those, and then we pass on our findings to the departments. But in reading the critical incidents, we are seeing with increasing frequency, particularly in New York City, the use of interim on cases with extended violent criminal histories. And I know it's a concern of the commissioner down there as well. So something that I think we should be discussing. Carl, Mr. Lewis, I want to ask if you have any comment at some point.
Well, part of my comment is, some of this is prosecutor driven.
I'm sorry?
Some of this is driven by prosecutors and different approaches, especially the gun cases. See that in New York City. But the main thing I want to say is that, we have going to soon be about 1,300 judges, state-paid judges. And it's difficult for us to manage. They're elected, they're appointed, but they're independent. But what we do attempt to do is we train them. Every summer we have what we call judicial seminars. Sometimes we do 3 of them because we can't fit everyone in the seminar at once. We do 3 separate ones during the summer, 2 separate ones. But I think maybe we should have a dialogue about having conversations, with the judges who have criminal jurisdiction, to let them know that there are tools developed. I can't imagine that judge would say no to something that gives them more information before they, put someone on probation, interim probation, especially when we're dealing with cases like gun cases and violent felony offenses. So, and someone said, and right, this is usually done to try to get around mandatory sentences, and it's a means to an end. But I think it would be a useful thing for all of us is if we put you, and I'll talk to Judge Zayas about it, is that we try to set up a program for the summer seminars where probation comes in, talks about this issue and others, whatever you would want to put on, and about the need for judges to get PSIs or whatever. So I think that's the best way to try to bridge this gap, because like I said, we can't hand down anything by a rule by fiat with judges. I mean, if it's a legal sentence, it's a legal sentence. But we can let them know your concerns, or you could let them know your concerns if we have this type of chance, an opportunity when we have every judge with criminal jurisdiction in the state in one place, and we can set up a training to train them on your concerns and what the law allows and what you think are the best practices.
Yeah, we'd appreciate that opportunity, and I understand certainly as a prosecutor, officer of the court, that judges have discretion. And this is not, by the way, in any way charging judges. It's just saying that given the gravity of these cases, we'd like the opportunity to provide more information to judges, not less, and to have clearer communication. So the judge has the most information available to him when he, in fact, accepts what is often a plea. Let's face it, the vast majority of cases a plea, and the person is placed on interim. So the judge has the totality of information available to him or her, and probation's made fully aware of it as well. So I think we can have that conversation. We certainly are a partner in training judges on the Ignition Interlock. We do a lot of extensive training. Tom Farr works with Support Administration. I've done a lot of training with the judges over the years on the Ignition Interlock, and I think there's an opportunity here for us to work together because in many ways, probation officers are officers of the court too. We're in court, every day working with judges. So that's really what we're trying to do, is highlight an examination. Is interim really appropriate? We can meet with the district attorneys as well. Is interim appropriate for a gun case? Should that case be on probation supervision? And then if it's going to be offered interim, let's ensure that we get an investigation so all the parties, including the defense counsel, see a copy of that PSI in court. And so we know the individual. What we don't want is we don't want the individual showing up on the doorstep of probation as just placed on interim. We don't know what we need to know about that individual. I think community safety would be better served. So I appreciate the comments of everyone around the table. I think it's been a very meaningful discussion. Please advise Judge Zass, we appreciate the opportunity to collaborate and work with the Office of Court Administration. I think it's a very good meet and greet the first day, and we look forward to continuing that.
Can I comment on the other part that I mentioned,
Sure.
the sentence
Yeah,
being
so
imposed?
this is another issue that we're seeing, and it's something that we would do as part of the judicial training.
So the other thing that I mentioned before that is part of this issue that, probation departments are bringing to our attention is, the CPL 390-30 sub 6 requires sentence to be imposed within a year of the conviction, with the exception that Bob mentioned before. If somebody is in behavioral health services through OCA recognized treatment court, so that it could be up to 24 months. But generally, sentence has to be imposed within 12 months. Probation departments are making us aware that sentence is not occurring within that required time frame. So we would recommend to the probation departments that they are communicating to the court in advance of that date approaching, just knowing that the 12-month period is coming up and that they don't have authority to supervise beyond that point. So that's something that we can continue to discuss as well.
So the gap is the problem. The gap is the problem. There should be no gap. We've got to really have a transition in advance and planning. And I know our probation departments provide monthly reports on interim cases to the courts in those cases, regular memos and communications. But what I'm saying to the directors is you got to work with the courts and set those up. I know this has been a problem in several counties. Director Davidian has brought it to my attention in Orange County sometimes, where several months go by and the person is completed interim but hasn't been placed on probation supervision. So these are areas that these issues arise, and another point of training and discussion with judges. But I'm glad you were able to hear that today, so and advise the chief judge, chief administrative judge. So thank you. The next part of the agenda, I think that was really helpful, and I want to tell you that I appreciate everyone's participation in that and the comments. I think they were valuable. Now we're going to provide some OPCA updates, and this is kind of a rapid round where we go around just to advise you. And our capable staff are here, who really manage quite a bit throughout the state. So first, I'm going to call upon Gary to just talk about the first two items briefly, what with PSI repository, State Director's Memorandum 2023-9 that went out, and then what he's working on with the Compass to Compass migration that he's overseen, and then maybe fall on Frank Cangiano and Nicole Aldi, who are heading this up, both for the probation departments and the ETI community. So just an oversight with Gary, and then I'll ask Frank and Nicole to add to that if you would, okay?
Thank you. So Bob mentioned earlier regarding the PSI repository. So I think, everybody in the audience is aware that when a probation department completes a pre-sentence investigation through the Case Law Explorer report wizard, it populates into the statewide PSI repository. We've been going through an extensive process, Matt and myself and other staff over recent years. There was an audit of the PSI repository. So we went through and, basically cleaning up access to users and, putting some safeguards in place to who can access the PSI repository. We did recently publish updated guidance as attached to State Director's Memorandum 2023-9. The important thing I want to mention in this is there is going to be a provision where certain users within each probation department RI will have the ability to suppress or unsuppress pre-sentence investigations that have been submitted. So in the instance where there has been reports submitted where there's a factual error, perhaps court advises a probation department, I want this item corrected. The authorized user will be able to suppress a prior version of the report. Subsequently, they could unsuppress it. That ability is not in effect yet. We are still gathering the designations of users from all the probation departments. So we will be soliciting that again. I believe the last I looked, I think it was approximately half the departments had submitted, users to have that ability. So we'll be soliciting that again. And then in the near future, we will let you know when that goes live. So that in a nutshell.
So let me jump in, and Alan, if we could ask you as president of COPA to reach out to the directors. We need that designation because we need a designated rep from each probation department in the state who is going to have this unique ability to suppress and unsuppress reports. So the way it could occur is that the pre-sentence investigation is presented to the judge, and it comes to the attention of the judge that there's an inaccuracy in the PSI report. Maybe the address is in. They correct that and they send it back to the department. So in that particular case, the department's going to make that change in the PSI, and it's going to go into the PSI directory, and they're going to suppress that old report. We're not going to expunge that report. We're going to suppress it. The reason we're not going to expunge it is because it is a legal document that was submitted to a court of jurisdiction. So we don't want to expunge that. It's important that it continue to exist, but it should be suppressed because the judge has just advised the probation department that in fact the address or something in the criminal history was determined not to be correct in that report. So to do that, these people are going to be important. They're going to be the suppressors and the unsuppressors. Every department needs the designated official. So we want to wrap that up by the end of November. And so we can be in a position to go live in December.
Question about that, because this actually came up just yesterday. I had a couple reports back from the court that said make these redactions, so on and so forth. My understanding with that is once you go back in and make the redaction, resend it to the repository, it overwrites what was there.
My understanding was there could be multiple reports there, that you could see multiple with the same case number. So I think that's where we were trying to.
I thought that was part of the whole thing with the transmission, that it would overwrite what was there. Maybe that's an Audemont question then to find out.
I don't believe it overwrites and expunges. I think that it saves that document. And so there's multiple copies now. We want to, what I think it does is I think it suppresses the original. So
nothing is happening automated.
Right.
Somebody's going to have to go in to suppress it. That's what we're trying to
So
put in place.
let me then, since I just did 2 of these yesterday afternoon, I'll go into the repository when I get back to the office and look these up to see if there are 2 versions.
Right.
My understanding from all of this we were doing was that we'll just overwrite.
So let us check with that because the suppression is not in effect yet. So that's valuable.
And Alan, that might be within Caseload Explorer, but the prior version of the report was previously received by the repository. So I think that's what we're trying to.
Because it gets, we get it into the transmission report, that it goes to the repository again.
Yeah.
Because I checked that to be sure. And one other thing you may want to point out to people is that in order for it to go to the repository, there are certain criteria in caseload that have to be met. You have to have a director's approval and a supervisor's approval.
Right.
And if you don't have all of that in your individual caseload systems within the county, you're not going to get it. So some counties may think it's going, but it's not.
And again, the benefit here is not only for probation departments to see that PSI insured if they have a client who has a history in another jurisdiction, they can update that PSI. The Office of Mental Health utilizes the directory for Article 10 proceedings on civil confinement, those forensic hearings. And the Department of Correction, I believe, has access to it. The Board of Examiners for sex offenders, BSO, in making classification, has access to the repository. We have signed MOUs with each of these jurisdictions, as well as the Office of Court Administration. Again, this might be the best kept secret out there, that it's available to judges, because we do have some judges who have requested access, but probably more would benefit from it, particularly in those town and village courts. Very different when the probation department is in the same department as the county court. You can just walk it up and the report's there. But in those jurisdictions, particularly the rural jurisdictions, and even in this county, Albany County, right? You've got some town and village courts that could be 30, 40 miles away. Because our probation officers go out and do home visits there. So they're remote, and this could be a benefit for judges. So maybe as part of the judicial training, so as we also talk about the availability of the PSI repository, a great service available to judges. All right, Gary, why don't we move on to Compass R transition?
So next item, the migration from New York Compass to Compass R. We have sent out some materials on this. I'm just going to give a very quick comment on it. You know, New York Compass has served us very well over the years. But you know, there have been certain limitations, including the lack of transparency in scoring of the instrument that has, you know, brought challenges to us through, you know, foils and other things. So the decision was made to move to Compass R, which is Equivant's latest version of their assessment. It's basically their national instrument. It's not a New York customized instrument specifically. So, you know, some of the advantages to that is the transparency that I spoke of. You know, somebody could, you know, really just look at, you know, how the scoring occurs and see, you know, what risk classification is being recommended. You know, for a lot of other purposes, you know, standardization and consistency of training using a national model, you know, streamlining IT processes. There's a lot of advantages for this purpose. Also, you know, updating of the language. You know, the language used in, you know, assessment now perhaps is, you know, very different than it was 20 some years ago. So trying to be, you know, more representative and, you know, again, modernizing language. So there's a lot of reasons why we've made the decision to move to it. And now I'll ask Fred Kenjiao and Nicole Aldi to talk a bit about their training plan. So if you want to start.
So we're in the final stages of this migration. So now we're going to start training the field in the Compass R. And the way we decided to roll this out for probation departments is we took a look at the current NY Compass instructors that have previously been certified and trained. And we sent out email notifications to them because we talked with Equivant and we recognize that if you are a current NY Compass instructor, you may not necessarily have to go through the full Compass R instructor training. So we are hosting a 2-day certification training for current NY Compass instructors to be held November 20th and November 21st. And we have about, we have 10 people, I believe, for that particular class, including, I think someone from Greene County is coming as well, and someone from Westchester County is coming to that 2-day. Following that, we have also reached out to the Academy site probation directors and other select probation departments to try to fill a 4-day Compass R instructor training, which is happening December 5th through the 8th of this year. So we do have, and we're finalizing the list, Nicole and I working with Leonard Price and Darcy Katzmauer, our office, to finalize the list of people for the 4-day training. We are very limited in training slots, unfortunately. I wish we can train more at this time. Before that 4-day training, it's 12 people, which includes those from probation departments as well as those from the ATI programs. So once that list is finalized, we'll send it out. As far as acceptance email, early next week, to recognize Thanksgiving is here already. And we'll let the departments know that. Where we go from there, as far as training probation departments, we still have to talk with Equivant as far as perhaps being able to host another instructor training because we recognize a need, something like that.
So just a quick follow-up, and then I'll turn it over to Nicole for any comment regarding the ATIs or otherwise. The other thing, the importance of this is the 2-day training, that is occurring next week. So all the people who have been currently trained on New York Compass, the people who are trained next week will then be able to start delivering, the updated training on the new tool to those who've already been trained. Then down the road, they will be able to deliver, the full Compass R training to new staff as they come on. So it's going to be a tiered approach. Again, providing the updated training for those previously trained, and then you're rolling out the full training. So, Nicole, any further comment on the ATI?
Just two other things that I think are important to mention because of the necessity of the training. It's important to know that we have BCGS is paying for travel expenses for these trainers because we do have the need to get people out there and get trained. And we've also added an attestation to this training requirement. If you are being trained in the Compass R, that you will be required to not only train your own either program or department, but be available for regional trainings as well until we can grow that training capacity out the state. So we do, as Frank said, we put out specialized to the probation academies because they train the most amount of people, but we also have put out to large ATI programs or agencies that utilize the Compass as well, because as with probation, alternatives to incarceration programs are required in most models to do a risk need assessment and a validated risk need assessment.
Right. Two good points. Thank you, Nicole. If you didn't hear that, I'm going to repeat it. We're paying for the training. We're paying for lodging and expenses associated with coming for the training because we think this is so important that we have this stable of trained Compass R trainers across the state, both in probation and ATI, and then the attestation that if we're going to pay you the train, that you will train. That we'll call upon you that you'll need to train as we go forward. Important to the probation departments, important to the ATIs. Keep in mind the ATIs each have their own compartmentalized database. Every Compass assessments that's completed by an ATI program stays within a compartmentalized database for that program alone. There's no sharing. Confidentiality is preserved. Probation, it's a common database because, in fact, it's important for one department to know what another department did. It's a little different. We're sworn peace officers, so it's
Transferability.
Transferability. It's compartmentalized. When does this occur? Hopefully January. Office of Information Technology is testing various versions of the latest software, and it looks good. It's a couple of tweaks. I spoke to ITS yesterday, but we fully expect in January we will go live with Compass R. Again, it's a transparent instrument, summative scoring. Any person, if a person challenges defense counsel in court, says, Judge, I don't know, I'm not sure about this algorithm. We can hand them a one-page summative scoring sheet. They can determine on their own how it's scored. Risk assessment is important. Structured and validated risk assessments outperform individual judgments each and every day. It's an important tool at identifying the criminogenic needs, the things that we have to address: criminal attitudes, criminal thinking, criminal associates and peers. These are the drivers of criminal behavior. New York State is a national leader in this area. The 57 probation departments outside the city of New York use the Compass R. Compass, New York Compass, and we use the Compass R. So we'll always make it available to New York City should they choose to join. And then the Aussie. So enough on Compass. Any questions on Compass on how we're rolling that out? All right, so we're going to move on to the next advisory. That's my action plan. We have put a lot of work into, and I say we, but it's been primarily Teresa Scano-Hansen and her team in leading the integration of the Aussie Caseworks into Caseload Explorer. And this group has made enormous progress, and we're very close actually doing UAT testing. I'm going to turn it over to Teresa. Just give us an update where we are, Teresa, and the value of this integration as you see it.
Sure. So I can't talk about the map and CE planning without talking about some of the other modules that have become available on Caseload Explorer this year. But I will say that we have brought together a group of testers within New York State to support us in this project. On Monday, we kicked off that test group with, which consists of 27 testers from 8 probation departments, plus several of us from DCJS that will be testing the UAT site for the integration of Caseload Explorer with Yazi Caseworks. When we talk about CE planning, we're talking about a uniform case plan format that will become available to departments. In the testing process, it will include what we've already built with CE assessments, which I describe in my non-computer programmer, non-computer developer language as the launch point into the assessment tool, but also the receiving of the assessment information back to the Caseload Explorer system, as well as CE planning, where that uniform case plan will live in the Caseload Explorer system, which we've coined the MAP, the My Action Plan. By the way, there are 2 versions of that. There's an adult version and a juvenile version, which have slight differences based on category labels and language used, but the construction of the uniform case plan are the same for adults and juveniles. But I can't also talk about that integration without talking about Yazi 2.0. So similar but a little different from the Compass migration. Yazi 2.0 is a national upgrade, but from Orbis Partners. In New York State, we tested the Yazi 2.0 upgrade in the earlier part of this calendar year. We had 1 probation department that joined us in the testing of that. That was Erie Probation, and provided feedback back to Orbis Partners about the New York customizations to that upgrade. In New York, we have customizations to the Yazi. So the New York version looks a little bit different than the Oregon version, for example. But the primary tenets of the assessment tool are the same. We will, in the test period that begins this week with our 27 testers that I spoke about, we will be testing both the integration as well as the upgrade to Yazi 2.0. So I did give the test group an orientation to what that Yazi 2.0 looks like in our Monday meeting, but essentially the highlights of Yazi 2.0 are that the Yazi questions remain the same. The algorithm that produces the Yazi risk result for recidivism, as well as the criminogenic need areas and the youth strengths, are all behaving as they have in the past. What is different is the design of the Caseworks platform and the visual appearance. We think it's actually, based on our testing experience from early this year, a bit more intuitive in its design. But our intent with the integration is that probation officers no longer will need to duplicate client creation or identification between Caseload Explorer and Yazi Caseworks. No longer will they need to log in to both Caseload Explorer and Yazi Caseworks, which currently lives on its own URL, its own platform. And it will integrate the work seamlessly. So as a probation officer progresses through the Yazi assessment, in not only producing the risk result, and by the way, having that feedback to Caseload Explorer as an assessment event with the results, it will also transfer the work that the probation officer develops in the Yazi 2.0 as far as the behavioral analysis, which in Yazi speak is the ABCD, and the identified domains, 1, 2, 3 domains for prioritization in that case plan, as well as the targets. So the integration will translate all of that work created by the user in Yazi back to Caseload Explorer. Testing commences this week. We are waiting for the go-ahead. We meet with Catalyst again at 3:30 today.
And Teresa, the wheel comes over too, doesn't it?
It does, in
Wheel.
CE assessment.
And it's been enhanced, the wheel, and I'm a big fan of the wheel. The wheel is a great analysis tool for probation officers. So this is monumental. This is monumental because it is going to drive the development of a uniform case plan. That is such hard work for probation officers who are overtaxed. And what the probation officers will have to do, of course, is continue to work on goals and objectives, right? Just they'll need to do that and prioritize. The domains come over, they inform that analysis, but for goals and objectives, of course, probation officers will be the technicians there. It's going to focus the attention of the probation officer on the work, on the real issues, the risk and the needs. And I know they've changed those terms, right, to strengths and needs. And I think that this is going to change practice for the 57 county probation departments outside of New York City that utilize this. Again, as we go forward, we'll continue to engage New York City. We're certainly, it's available to New York City to take a look at, and New York City's got its own IAP, but certainly we're open to extending this, and I think it's going to be a major achievement. Teresa's done a lot of work on this, and I've been on some of those meetings. We have great partners in Orbis and CE, and I think the product is really going to be great. Audemars Catalyst is testing it, has tested it already. It looks good. I expect by December we will go live with this. Short of any major findings, we'll be go live. There will be training available for this as well. So, any questions about case plan? And I know the hour is moving on. Next is I can handle it. The universal statement of work. We developed a statement of work which is rather extensive, almost $250,000 with Catalyst. I spoke with Catalyst last evening. They will be beginning this work in the next several weeks, undertaking that. There is a lull in their time schedule now while the UAT is being tested, and they're going to prioritize addressing 3 or 4 more outstanding issues with CE programs. Try to address those this week and next, because that's important. With the uniform case plan, it will pull resources from counties that have identified juvenile programs and services into the case plan automatically. That's a good reason why departments should ensure that the tenant is robust on juvenile services and CE programs, right? That they've got all their services loaded in there. So one thing drives another. This is all interconnected. Thank you, Teresa, and thank you for your work in heading that up. Teresa's become an IT specialist, much more so than she ever envisioned or wanted to be, and I appreciate that. Lastly, on the technology and training update, and we're going to call upon Patty to give us an update on our very successful CE user training. That's training is initiated.
Okay, so the CE user biweekly training program commenced, I believe we're in our 2nd session. And this is basically a series of trainings related to Caseload Explorer on predefined topical areas that have users out in the field who are delivering these trainings to the rest of the state on those topical areas. Like I said, there's been 2 delivered to date, and these will run right through January with the expectation that perhaps we'll add some more topics on term. And we also have the benefit of having representatives, from Audemars present on the calls as well, so that they're able to intervene if there's a question, about the technicality and the use of the software. But the users themselves who are selected to do the training are able to kind of handle some of the New York specific topic area concerns that come up. That's essentially the.
Thank you for that. And, just a shout out to Jess Smith and Kristen Hinson from heading this effort up. I asked them to do that. They did a great job. The first training, Mary Ellen, I'm going to point this to you as Director of Training for COPA. We had over 450 officers on the training on November 1st. And the one this week, 301. So the response has been really great. And again, I'm kind of coining this as users helping users, which means that it's not perfect. And that once in a while we find, clarifications are needed. So we're going to put those into the chat following each week. Come to the next training. And I think the next one is the 29th, if I'm not mistaken, on November. So a lot of good training going on. And thanks for the training unit leading as well as the ATI unit. Regulatory amendments, 356 is with the chamber. We've checked on that. The Governor's Council is still reviewing that. I don't think there's any update. That is JD intakes. We're ready for public comment on that. Don't really have any more information. Teresa, any comment that you think is necessary on that?
I don't have any new information.
No, I don't think we do.
The probation director saw it for informal comment a year ago.
Yeah.
It was in October of last year. And then we incorporated COPA's recommendations from that review. So
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. That's helpful. Patty, comments on 346. You got a work group going that you're leading.
Yeah, so I mean, we've covered a lot of what this work group is doing, and the fact that it's been ongoing now since August. Only 2 additional points that I'll raise in addition to the things I've already mentioned that we're tackling, and that is we've contemplated an SDO, Staff Development Officer ratio, 2 officers that they're overseeing within the academy sites, recognizing that a lot of the work that those academies are doing, that they're run primarily by staff development officers, and there's just some additional requirements within those sites. We initially had thought about doing an SDO to officer ratio kind of across the board, and as the work group contemplated that, it really boiled down to it's more appropriate within the academy site. So that's an additional item, and we didn't even tackle this yet, and it's going to have to come up in the next couple of meetings if we want to draft in early 2024. But we've also talked about the idea of accreditation standards for the academies. And so, at some point we'll probably raise that as part of our work group discussion. But as Bob mentioned, our plan is to try and wrap things up and have a draft by early 2024 so that we can get to the rulemaking process and have a revised rule that we can operate from next year.
Right. And early 2024 is a goal. Regulation is always not, like I said to Patty yesterday, it's like a democracy. It's messy, and Teresa knows a lot about this with the Raise the Age. It's messy, but we end up with a really good product in the end. So, we'll find out. We'll do the best we can. Thank you. Program updates. I just want to say earlier, maybe Frank, you want to talk about quality assurance, because we did this with the Danielle and folks at a conference on this. And in fact, some of the departments are here today who participated in that. You want to give us just a brief on that? Sure.
Yeah, so on August 15th, we held the quality assurance webinar. Jim Duque from Westchester County, Christine Durante from Monroe, and Director Galuppi from Onondaga participated, and really provided departments an opportunity to hear how internal quality assurance was occurring within those 3 departments. And since that time, we have created a quality assurance section on the IJ portal, which also includes the documents shared by those departments. So we wanted to first thank them for allowing us to use their internal documents as part of that quality assurance section on the IJ portal. And I just feel ultimately that we do want to build some type of capacity within the departments to have their own quality assurance within when it comes to case reviews, things of that nature. So if there are any questions people have on that, they can ask now. They can email us anytime, or want to have any feedback on that.
I just wanted to say I thought it was an excellent presentation, really useful information. and so important today, that quality assurance, so that you can measure your performance outcome, your performance measures and your outcomes.
Thank you, Mary Ellen, for that. We appreciate it. We're trying to encourage every department to establish a quality assurance program. I want to again thank those departments that Frank cited, Westchester, Monroe, and Onondaga. Phil Galuppi up in Onondaga, and these departments and others have their own quality assurance, but these departments have automated that. Whereas every supervisor gets a random selection of cases to review. And it's done a lot of good. It's put probation directors in a position of being able to identify early on where there's some deficiency or weakness or a lack of supervision of caseloads. This is the type of thing that can really help protect the department and the director. So our staff put together the quality assurance section in the IJ portal. I encourage all the directors to visit that. Directors may want to appoint a champion within their department to look at data, including quality assurance. That's another good idea there. Next is our juvenile technical assistance. I'm going to ask Teresa just to give us an update on where we are with our deep dive juvenile technical assistance, because her unit's been working pretty steadily on this.
Sure. So Onondaga continues in the technical assistance process with our team. They began a year and a half ago, I think it's been now, but they've done some pretty amazing work in identifying areas of emphasis and change within their youth-related practices, and are nearing completion of their own action plan, which is extensive. So they've done some pretty great things. Westchester had also agreed to partner with us last year, and we're moving towards the identification of those areas for focus in the action plan, and we'll circle back together in January. And then Suffolk joined the project just a couple months ago, and has provided us materials that we'll provide feedback to them on, which culminates in another session together in person with my team and their department to work toward identification of areas where they'd like our support in doing work.
Thank you. And that visit to Suffolk taught us that community is a lot bigger than we even imagined it was here. With 6 district offices, I think we were running around trying to get to where we needed to be. But just a shout out to Deputy Director Krislin Jacob, who was wonderful as hosting that meeting, and her staff. So it was a great meeting after Teresa and I finally found out where we were going. So that was good. Next is our EFS programs. I'm going to call upon Michelle Koch, who's been doing a lot of work with her unit on employment-focused services programs through our increased funding. Michelle.
Thanks, Bob. So one of the key ways, to contribute positively to community safety and, successful, lives overall is to help justice-involved individuals not just find, but keep employment. So one of the main tenets, of the employment-focused services programs, which serve probation departments, parole, individuals on parole supervision, and court-referred individuals, is to provide them with cognitive behavioral interventions as well as employment readiness training, such as DCJS's Ready, Set, Work program. So of the total ATI funding, the employment-focused services programs get about $8.7 million currently. And as Deputy Commissioner Macaron mentioned, there are some new programs that were recently funded. And the reason why this is important to us is because that means that now 21 probation departments get to benefit from employment-focused services programs provided specifically to individuals who are on probation supervision. So those counties are Schenectady, Cayuga, Seneca, and Orange. So I wanted to mention that today, and hope that in the future, when there are other opportunities for probation departments to partner with employment services within their communities, to apply for funding when that is made available to you.
Just want to say Michelle's been a great champion of bringing forth the need of additional funding for probation departments and establishing the employment-focused services programs within the department. It was on that basis that I was able to support a request of the commissioner who led the charge in getting increased ATI funding, including the employment services funding and additional funding for county reentry task forces, which is another hat that Michelle wears. And in a moment, we're going to ask Nicole Aldi to talk about pretrial and ATI funding as well. So a great champion, because, you know, she came to me and said, Bob, we've got these employment focused services programs operating in a number of departments, Columbia and Niagara, and they're doing great work. But the directors really didn't see the last round of the RFPs. And I know we learned at the executive leadership in this room last year around this time that some of those directors brought to our attention that they wish they had seen it. So we're able to fund additional employment-focused services programs. I was reading a case last night, and the officer did a particularly good job managing the collaterals, et cetera. But in the background, the person was constantly searching for employment. He's watching his grandmother getting paid for it. He had odd jobs, and it just struck me that this person would have benefited from the Ready, Set, Work, the soft skills that teaches a person not only to obtain, but to sustain employment. So, you know, when I send the notes out to the directors, this is what I say, great job on a very caring probation officer. But wouldn't it have been great if they had a Ready, Set, Work program? So we're going to work to increase that. Thank you, Michelle, for your work on that. Appreciate that. Frank, do you want to talk about GTSC funding? I know we want to thank DMV because we did get, I think, an increase in $250,000 this year, GTSC funding.
We did, yes. I mean, we, last year there was approximately $1.25 million that were given out to localities. And that has increased to 1.49 million. And all the award letters have gone out to the counties in regards to Leander's Law and in support of enforcement of the English Interlock Device Program. That's all I have for that.
I would add that we also have been awarded monies again for the IID non-installer enforcement initiative. So, you know, there'll be more information coming on that.
Great point. So this year, Gary, maybe you want to just talk briefly, and Frank, about the 3 counties that received special awards under the uninstaller enforcement program, a select program that we.
Sure. So through Governor's Traffic Safety Committee funding, we have conducted IID non-installer enforcement projects in, you know, localities, you know, a number of times over the years, you know, some enforcement operations, training, and now this year again, enforcement operations. This year, Saratoga, Nassau, and Monroe counties received, was it about $10,000 each, or?
Approximately $35,000 each, actually.
Okay.
For their non-installer enforcement.
Okay, so $35,000 each they receive to fund non-installer enforcement cooperative activities between probation departments and law enforcement partners in the community to look at you know, people that they believe might be driving without IIDs. So again, it's you know, trying to reinforce the requirements of Leander's Law, including public information campaigns to educate the public on the requirements of the law. Because, you know, again, somebody could be criminally liable for letting somebody else drive a vehicle without an IID in it. So there is definitely a public information element built into it. But again, trying to promote the, you know, public safety goals of Leander's Law.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I mean, and they were very creative in the ways they were conducting these enforcements. I mean, they collaborated with police departments, collaborated during victim impact panels, utilizing that money for probation officers to make those efforts. And quite honestly, not what surprised a couple of the counties was that they actually found a level of compliance with this population as well as finding non-compliance. I mean, they sometimes, for some occasions, they were surprised by how many people actually were complying with the regulations. Despite them doing the surveillance, despite them making those enforcement efforts, they found a solid level of compliance with this population.
Some I read were taking, they were riding bicycles to the probation department. They were taking buses. There's compliance out there.
Yes, absolutely.
Great job on the three departments. Thank you to those departments. I know Landon Price and Michelle Melendez worked on those pretty intensively. Danielle Brandy. So really did a lot of work on that. And
So in the coming months, another three jurisdictions will be identified.
right, so the
and
team will
invited
be
participants.
So we may be reaching out to a county close to you and saying, would you like to be a partner with a non-enforcement grant? So I think it's important. Thanks for raising that, Gary. Nicole, could you tell us about the increase in, this should read increased ATI funding as well and pretrial services. Maybe you can cover both in terms of what's been done.
Or I'll make this brief. So in the 23-24 fiscal year budget, ATI funding was doubled to over $30 million. So with that, in addition to the employment focused programs that were funded, we also funded 5 other additional programs in mostly downstate, but they are very different in types of programs than we've had in the past. We have a restorative justice program that we are funding, also a women's program, a gun accountability program, which works with simple possession charges for individuals that receive that it's their first time felony offense and they receive target-based interventions and trauma care and also employment help there. So we were able to do 5 more of those programs, again, very specialized. As for the probation department, this will really stick out for everybody else. Pretrial funding was also renewed for the $20 million for the 23-24 fiscal year. Those letters should be going out very soon. It is anticipated that county should look to be receiving about what they received last year. So planning on that. 2 things that we, OPCA, had worked with our whole DCGS on is to implement 2 pieces that are a little different with this award. Again, it's an award, but we're asking for counties to have the pretrial services agencies that are certified by OCA receive the funding within 60 days of the award, which is something that is very important because we found out last award, some counties were very delayed in receiving that money or had not received it as of months later. Also, we are asking for an outline of how the money will be being spent. Last year, there was not the question on that, although I've got to give COPA a huge round of applause for putting together a meeting to really discuss how should this be done. So people were very interested in spending money correctly and effectively. So this year, we're asking for an outline just to be able to provide more technical assistance to counties if they're unsure of what would be covered under this.
Nicole, we're also, I think, including in that letter, what we learned through the 15-city tour with the commissioner, that sometimes those funds are delayed in getting to the departments or delayed to getting to the programs. And we're putting in a requirement that those funds be where they're passed on to an agency, distributed within, I think, 60 days. So that because part of the city tour, we learned that at least one organization upstate, said the county received the funding a number of months ago, but we never saw it. So we're trying to put some guide rails, ensuring that the money gets to where it needs to go. I just want to thank you for your work on that, particularly last year as well, and responding to budget and stuff. Great job there. Thank you. So we're coming up to the end. A few announcements. It was my pleasure to award Probation Supervisor John Madden of Cayuga County to receive the 2023 Outstanding Service Award to a probation officer. John's done some amazing work in Cayuga County. He was nominated by his director, Jay DeWillispear, which comes to get a recommendation from Director Jay DeWillispear. Pretty highly recommended. And it was my pleasure in doing so. I met John and his wife and provided the award at the POA earlier in the summer. Here at BCA, some of our staff and units have received specialized awards, and Danielle Brindis, our probation community correction representative in the adult probation operations unit, received a commissioner's award. And both our ATI unit which is overseen by Nicole Aldi. Probation, Education, Reentry Unit, which is overseen by Michelle Clark, were also recognized and their staff members for outstanding service. So congratulations again to these recipients in receiving these awards. They work very hard each and every day. They're passionate about their work, and it was great that the commissioner recognized them. Our Chip Tashian received an award. I'm going to ask Kelly Parmentier to talk about that in the interstate unit. We don't hear much about the interstate unit, but let me tell you, they're busy and they do a lot of work with your units, 6,000 cases a year. And Kelly's got that unit running like a well-oiled machine. So Kelly, tell us what's going on in interstate and Chip's award.
Sure. So the Interstate Commission for Juveniles recognizes individuals who are performing the day-to-day work for their outstanding work and when they surpass expectations. And Chip was selected and recognized by the commission at the 2023 annual meeting, not only for his hard, important work in processing our ICJ caseload, he handles all of the ICJ caseload, but also for ensuring compliance with the ICJ rules and for his ability to work collaboratively with departments and his colleagues across the country in resolving any issues with the tribes. Very happy for him.
Chip's a great staff person. Congratulations, Chip, on this award. Really proud of the work that Chip does. And I will say that he took on compliance, working with, because we kind of divide the state up, but Chip took on New York City as well. And thank you, New York City, in working so successfully with Chip over the last several months, because they're doing a great job down there. Commissioner Holmes, thank you, because the department's really working. We've never really worked so well together in terms of interstate cases. I think we're way up there in the dashboard in the green, so we're doing quite well. Thank you, Kelly. New business. We were advised that DCGS is OPCA and our oversight of probation, probably ETI services as well. We'll see when we have the kickoff meeting in a week with the Office of State Controllers. We're going to be audited for our oversight of probation services. We're actually quite excited by this because we have a lot of documentation, a lot of systems in place, a lot of controls. As you know, critical incidents, sex offender registry, quarterly reports, warrant policies, the annual plans, Article 13A plans, have a lot of documentation in terms of the training that we do. Not everyone we train is able to do that through automation. We got a good handle on that. Records in the interstate as well, and we have outcomes. We have measurable outcomes. So just wanted to mention that to you. I don't know whether they'll reach out to an actual user. They may. If so, we'll work with you to get some input from actual county probation departments. I suppose it's possible. We'll learn more after the kickoff meeting. Secondly, under new business, we did receive a copy of a letter that County Executive, the President of NISAC, Dan McCoy in Albany, actually County Executive, wrote to Commissioner Rosado talking about the need for continued support over alternatives to incarceration and probation in order to protect the public and reduce reliance. I wanted to share this with you. I think it's an excellent resolution passed by NISAC. It quotes the continue to find in state aid, and that is certainly true. And without going into detail, cites the plethora of services provided by probation departments. And again, it includes ATIs. The good news is New York State doubled the amount of funding for ATI programs in this current budget. Governor Hochul made a commitment of increasing from some $17 to $33 million for ATI programs. We spoke about that. We tripled the funding for the county reentry task forces, a subject near and dear to the Commissioner's heart as mine. from 3.8 to $11.5 million. We also continued the provision of funding under pretrial services. We increased funding to probation departments this year because give funding doubled from 18 to $36 million. And we increased funding for probation from 1.8 to $6.5 million. And we were successful, and Gary Goebel's been lead on this, successful in identifying the critical work that probation does as part of the GIVE program. And that there should be a floor set, a threshold set to ensure that probation receives adequate funding. And to their credit, OPS supported that, our sister agency next door, Office of Public Services, and we were able to increase funding for the GIVE program. So there have been some increases in funding. Having said all that, we are cognizant of the great work that probation departments do across New York State. We are looking at the funding which we recognize the regular state aid has not increased in many years. So we're taking a look at that. Today I heard the necessity of including funding for training, which would go a long way, specifically to support training. So we will include that as well. Any questions, comments on the NISAC resolution? Certainly you can spend a few minutes. I know it's been a long meeting, but we still have time. Any comments on the NISAC resolution? I'm sure Copa saw it as well, Alan. Right.
No, I think, yeah, we had gone over it and come up with some suggestions for inclusion in terms.
Thank you. And thank you for the well-written letter. And thank Dan for submitting it. Any other members of the commission? Any comments on the letter, NISAC letter? All right, which kind of brings us to the end of, today's agenda. And I just want to say that, as you know, I sent out a longer missive than I thought it was going to be on my retirement. And I am going to retire in January. And I have almost 47 years of public service. I'm 25 with Westchester County and over 21, 22 in New York State. And this job is the best job in the whole world. Because of the people you work with. There are no finer people in the state than criminal justice people, probation directors, probation officers, supervisors, community correction professionals in what I call our eclectic and robust set of alternatives to incarceration. The state has those. Our reentry task forces, no state has the county reentry task force system that we have in place. But also the opportunity to work with judges, train judges over the years. I have the highest respect for our judges, our police, prosecutors, defense counsel. I've been fortunate because I've been able to have a job for 47 years in the same field, a field that I really love, criminal justice. And the thing that has always driven me is the capacity to implement and lead change. And hopefully, I say public service is a small window in time, right? Our lives are a small window in time. That's why it's so important to live them, enjoy them, and take nothing for granted. But public service is a part of that. But it's a small window in time and an opportunity to lead that change. And so, in my mind, public service is an opportunity to do all we can to improve the lives of others, improve the lives of others, people who live with us. And in a way, I related it in my letter, and I'll end on this note. To my wife and I love to travel. We started late in life after we paid all those tuition bills. I really suggest you don't wait as long as I did. But travel is enriching. And the reason that I like it so much is you get to meet so many different people of different cultures. And what it teaches you is the one resounding note, that notion that there are good people everywhere throughout the world. And, that's pretty rewarding, and it reinforces the work that we do in this country. Fortunate living here, certainly, the beacon, right, throughout the world. But New York State is a big part of that. We're an important state. We're one of the largest largest states in the country. And criminal justice is at the very heart of a democracy and ensuring that people can live free and live safely. So the work that each of you did, I think, is so important, and it's really been my pleasure to be part of that. I'm sure I'll continue to show up in different places in the future, but and I will miss you. I'll miss you dearly. Just the opportunity to work with you each and every day. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. This opportunity. And with that, we will conclude our meeting.
Yeah, a few words, on behalf of the probation community. I know. I've known Bob probably the longest of everyone in this, probably in the profession. Actually, and he can for having me come up to New York, whether you know it or not. He was in charge of the search committee when they were looking for a director of probation in Westchester County, and he convinced me to take the job. And that was one of the reasons I did take it, was because we had great people like Bob and Bruce and
Pierce,
Bruce Pierce, and a lot of people in Westchester that were just great people, and convinced me to come up to New York. And we've had a 35-year adventure, you and I.
Yes, we have.
And I always said Bob made this job look easy because he truly loves probation and a great advocate for probation. I always say that, Mark Twain once said, you have a great job when your vocation is your vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah. You hear Bob reading cases last night, giving accolades and pushing the agenda, for probation. We've been very fortunate in probation, at least in the 35 years now that I've been in New York, of having great state directors. And Bob has been one of the best, state directors that I've had the opportunity to work with. And that's saying something when you talk about, Mark Broderick and Woods, Ed Woodser and Sarah, and I'm going to start throwing out names and I'm going to forget somebody. But, we've been very, very lucky. And I know on a personal note and on the part of my colleagues around the state, we will miss you. You're always welcome. I know Alan will tell you he's always welcome to show up to a COPACON. If you happen to be traveling and you're in the area, and I know we'll be seeing each other because we both live in Westchester.
Yes.
And Westchester is always open to you. Whenever you want to come and visit, the Westchester Probation Department, because it's as much my department as yours too.
Thank you for saying that.
I want to thank you for everything that you've done for probation over the years you've been sitting in that seat. Alan?
Well, on behalf of COPA, congratulations on your upcoming retirement, and thank you for your support over the years. One of the things that impressed me, I guess, is the fact that you relate as Bob. You sit here as the head of the state regulatory agency for probation. You can sit there and potentially be your overseer, maybe a poor choice of words, but you don't come across as being that dominant person. I'm Bob, and we are been able to address you as Bob on a much more personal level than if you were sitting here as, the probation king, so to speak. So we appreciate that. I mean, that's made things a lot easier for anybody. Your ability to recall facts and data and people's names and whatever is astounding. You make a hell of a politician in that regard. So, looking for votes, you know how to get them because you're just, oh yeah, I remember you, and so on and so forth. But your endurance, energy toward the cause, certainly we've bucked heads. We as the probation, OPA and whatever have not always been on the same standpoint and whatever, but we admire that the fact that you have been so driven in what you're doing and have tried to raise the stakes and raise the professionalism all around. So again, congratulations.
Thank you. It means a lot.
And look at the staff that you've been able to assemble. That's a tribute to you, Bob, that talent, how to bring people, into government and have them work for you and things that needed to get in. So I should all be proud that you've had the opportunity, to work for someone like Bob.
Thank you for saying that.
I'd like to just echo what's already been said. I have a few less years than Bob, but not too many. And so I've really had an opportunity to be in this job and to, as you said, work with Bob, and really appreciate the dedication and the professionalism. You've brought the whole profession along and really supported the evidence-based. So we are where we are today in large part because of you, Bob, and we really appreciate that.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Just let me say that, as everyone knows, you're only as good, you're only one person. It's really the staff who did the work. And, you know, we've been blessed here because we have a wonderful staff. Our staff, and it's true of DCJS, but our staff are passionate, intelligent, caring, and kind individuals. They have a great capacity about caring for each other. And that'll be the most difficult thing for me, waking up in the morning to see the staff. Because you know I drive 2.5 hours to get here.
Right.
And I look forward to it every morning. So anyway, thank you all. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Billy.
Yes.